recording will sit on the University of Iowa School of Social Work's website within 24 hours. Okay. Today is dedicated to making comments with impact to proposed federal rule changes that are governing long-term care facilities. This webinar is a project of the National Nursing Home Social Work Network that has received funding from the Retirement Research Foundation. So your two co-hosts for today are myself, Mercedes Bern-Klug, and Bob Connolly. And I'm going to start us out today. And then Joan Zlotnik is our main speaker. And then Bob will talk a little bit at the end. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. This webinar may actually go for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And then we'll continue to address your questions offline if you have more questions. So we'll be referring the resources available on our website, the National Nursing Home Social Work Network website. Right now there is the link to the Federal Register. There's going to be these other documents available to help you as you think about your comments. I wanted to say just a few words about this whole process that we're talking about making these comments to these proposed rules. And Bob and Joan, if you want to mute your phones while I'm speaking, that'd be great. Thanks. It's really about democracy in action. The United States Constitution lays out the responsibilities for our three branches of government. And the congressional branch, the legislative branch, can create federal agencies. Once created, the federal agencies have broad authority to make rules that amplify the laws that Congress passes. So Congress kind of looks at the big picture, passes a law, and then the agencies fill in with a lot of rules and regulations, trying to amplify the intent of Congress. During the FDR and the Truman administrations, there were two laws passed that directly affect our webinar today, and I'm just going to say a word about each of them. The Social Security Act and the Administrative Procedures Act. Was enacted in 1935, and then in 1965, 30 years later, Medicare was added as Title 18 of the Social Security Act, and Medicaid was added as Title 19. Both Medicare and Medicaid help fund care in long-term care facilities. Medicaid, the nursing facility care, and Medicare, skilled nursing facility care. Agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, is the kind of the umbrella to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So CMS is part of DHHS, and CMS that oversees Medicare and Medicaid. So it's CMS that's the federal agency that writes the regulations related to Medicare and Medicaid in long-term care facilities. The rules made by CMS that are related to Medicare and Medicaid in long-term care facilities are published as Title 42 of federal regulations. It's technically Title 42, Sub 483, Subpart B, and you can Google that and see the current regulations that are guiding nursing facilities that want to receive payment from Medicare and Medicaid. Now, Administrative Procedures Act, you might not have heard of this act, but it's a very important act, and it's really an important part of democracy. It was passed in 1946. There were a whole lot of new federal agencies that had been added to the government since 1900, and Congress wanted to specify some parameters for how these federal agencies would function. And so this law was passed, the Administrative Procedures Act, and it requires federal agencies to keep the public informed of the agency's activities, and also it requires agencies to invite public comment on proposed rules, and not only to invite that public comment, but to consider the comments before the rules are made final, and then that the final rules must be published and available to the public. That's kind of the background for today. The last major update of these rules was in 1991. That was a generation ago, 24 years ago. And so now CMS is proposing these major changes to its rules for nursing facilities in order for facilities to continue to receive Medicare and or Medicaid. They're going to have to meet requirements. And so these proposed requirements that are open for comment, so that people who work in nursing homes, people who own nursing homes, people who live in nursing homes, anybody with an interest in nursing homes are invited to make comments. And you can disagree, you can suggest an alternative, you can think about unintended consequences that may not have come to mind to the persons who were writing these proposed rules. The deadline is September 14th. And they'd like you to send your comments to CMS electronically, and Joan will show you how to do that, or through the U.S. Postal Service or through overnight mail, but please do not fax your comments. The main themes of the proposed rules are quality of care, quality of life, centered care, facility assessment, and competency-based approach, getting rules aligned with HHS priorities, comprehensive review and modernization, and then the implementation of recent legislation that also affects nursing homes. And those themes were reported by 3 CMS workers, and their names are listed there. CMS had a webinar or phone call last week about this rule. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joan Zlotnik, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience in making rules and providing advice to you for making your rules full of impact. Thanks.
Well, I am very happy to be part of this webinar. As Mercedes mentioned, last time the regulations for long-term care were and refined was back in 1991, and that was following the passage of major nursing home legislation in that passed in 1987, and that was sort of a major step forward. I have to say that I was actively involved in that at the time when I was working for the National Association of Social Workers from 1987 to 1994. I was hired right after the legislation had passed and was actively involved in working with what was the Healthcare Financing Administration and many other organizations to try to make the issues around quality of life, psychosocial care, social work services, residents' rights as strong as possible. We had some successes and some not successes, but I think what you see in this new draft regulations is what has transpired over the last 20 some odd years, and also other pieces of legislation that have begun to impact long-term care. One of them has to do with the fact that nursing homes have to cut back the use of psychotropic medications, and also, of course, the implications from the Affordable Care Act. So why do we want to submit regulations? I think it's important to know that social workers offer a unique perspective in making comments on these regulations, and as we will all discuss, there are many different parts that are relevant to what social workers do. The other thing, and I sort of take this from my 28 years of working in national social work organizations, if we don't speak for ourselves, no one else is necessarily going to speak for us. And there are so many important pieces related to social work services, what social workers do in terms of behavioral health, in terms of the training of social workers, in terms of discharge planning, in terms of being part of the interdisciplinary team, in terms of family caregiving and transitions, that it's really important that we speak on this, and we can certainly put in that context the ethical imperative from the NHSW Code of Ethics in terms of our advocacy to ensure that people's living conditions not fulfill basic human needs, but really promote social, economic, political, and cultural values and institutions that are compatible with the realization of social justice. So when commenting on the regulations, you really want to think about how do these proposed rules and regulations impact our own role as social workers in nursing homes, or as social workers who are providing consultation to nursing homes, as social workers who might be working with family caregivers who have family members in nursing homes, as people who work in ombudsman programs, other advocacy, as researchers studying long-term care. Really think about what these proposals say and what do we know from our own work that's important to share with CMS out what the implications are of what they're proposing and what our recommendations are to make them as strong as possible. Because the rules can affect not only how we do our job, but what our job is. If you're a worker at a nursing home right now, and major responsibilities maybe are admission and discharge and working with families, but not responsible for sort of the added provisions around behavioral health, are not part of every interdisciplinary team meeting, although I hope you already are. There are real implications for that, as well as the fact that the law says that nursing homes only over 120 beds have to have a full-time social worker. However, the requirements that are being put forth by CMS apply to all, no matter how many beds, and they're asking some questions about what the qualifications of social workers should be and what the implications are of the 120-bed rule. We also need to think about this in terms of our recognition as professionals working in nursing homes, knowing that as facility right now is not required to have a nursing home, a social worker, what the link is between our professional role and the requirements now that say in nursing homes over 120 beds that it could be someone with a BSW or a related degree, and as well as our relationship to other disciplines as we're part of the interdisciplinary team. We also want to think about the new rules and regulations in terms of the impact that it has on nursing home residents and their family members in terms of autonomy, rights, quality of life, and access to services and resources, including services that are available in the community. So, as Merce said, anyone can comment on any part of the proposed rule. I'd like to stress that the comments be submitted electronically. That's probably the easiest and most effective way to do that. And I'm going to see if I can come up with the right. Yes. This is a copy of the link of the proposed rules, and you'll see that there's a green button that says submit a formal comment. So you can submit your comments there. Down below that, there's a link, and also Marissa will have it posted on the nursing home website that you can click on the PDF, which is probably the easiest way to read the regulations. But then when you submit a comment or comments, it's easiest to do it sort of just by clicking through this button. Comments are not counted in terms of, well, we had 20 people who said this and 20 people who were against it, so we won't make any change. It's not about counting, but it's really about the impact and strength of what we have to say in our comments. So it becomes very important in writing comments to use where we can scientific data, expert opinions, and know that the facts that are accumulated during this, both the process they did in terms of the pre-rulemaking, which is when NHSW submitted those formal comments that we'll talk about as we go forward, and in those rulemaking stage, that you can really impact what the final rules will say, because if we make comments that really say these new regulations are so important to enhance the well-being and quality of life and quality of care of nursing home residents, but we really need to address staffing issues or whatever, that can really make a difference. So know that your comments can really make a difference. And I don't hear from social workers or about the social service provisions, or only hear from people who say, oh, these are not feasible because we can't afford it, there's not enough money, or whatever. It's we're not going to get what we've been trying to get for many years in terms of nursing homes. I do want to say, and I said it says it on the early slide, that I'm speaking now just personally from my own experience over many years, and I'm not speaking on behalf of NHSW or any other entity. These are just my comments and my opinions. So first of all, in terms of commenting, know that your responses will be public and CMS has to read them. So the staff at CMS, and it's probably those same folks and some others who did the webinar that Merce mentioned, who will be reviewing what's said. They have to review everything, and they have to comment on why they changed things based on the comments they received, or kept things the same, or what they're going to sort of address in the future. When you're developing comments, identify what you're making a comment on. If you're responding to a specific page in the Federal Register and a specific section, or if you're responding, in fact, to the question they asked about social work qualifications, say that. So you're being very clear what you're commenting on. Or if you're commenting on the behavioral and mental behavioral health section they propose, or if you're focusing on the part about return to community, be very specific. If you're responding on a specific provision like 483.15b, which is now changed to 483.70q or whatever, say that. So it's very clear to CMS what you're saying and why, and what it's in relation to. Also, if there are things that are not addressed in these regulations that you think are really important for the quality of care and quality of life of residents in long-term care facilities that are funded through Medicare and Medicaid, and you have knowledge and data to include that, you can certainly do that. I want to also just kind of give some advice. I know often when we do these things as due on September 14th, although that is a Jewish holiday, so I hope they actually change it. But it's when you're submitting comments, have someone else read them. Maybe even have two people read them. Maybe someone who's familiar with nursing homes and someone who's not familiar with nursing homes, so that you can make sure what you're saying is clear and understandable. And I think it's also very important that you identify who you are, your role, your degrees, your years of experience, and your position, so they know what you're basing your information on. When you comment, be as specific as possible. You can provide recommended language, provide a rationale for each of your recommendations, provide data, research where particular standards are relevant, like NHSW standards for nursing homes, long-term care, licensing requirements, because one of the things about the CMS proposed regulations, as well as the old ones, they require that the staffing provisions meet state licensing standards. So in your state, you have specific licensing standards about who a social worker is and what those qualifications are, or who what the qualifications are required to provide health services, include that in your recommendations. Specific about, for instance, being a required part of all the interdisciplinary team meetings or other requirements will impact workload and indicate needs for expanded staffing support. In the proposal, they talk about wanting to look at issues around staffing for nurses. I would suggest that we say the same in terms of social workers, so that we look at what the relationship is to and we know from research that nursing homes that have more social workers and social workers with more qualification tend to have better outcomes or survey violations. Talk about how professional training and for instance, are required to do certain tasks, and that would really apply around the mental and behavioral health provisions. When you're thinking about there you are in Iowa or Idaho, think about if you or your facility are part of a larger coalition, if you're part of a peer support group or an entity that will be providing comments, let them know what your comments are, because it'll be important not only to have comments from individuals, but it'll be important for provider organizations, quality improvement organizations, advocacy groups, ombudsman's groups, social work groups to of the interdisciplinary team or the nursing home administrators to be making comments about these new provisions and supporting strengthened social work requirements. So it's important to only make comments, but let others know and work with others to develop and provide shared comments. There are some long-standing issues in terms of social work and related degrees, as I've mentioned. One of them is that only facilities over 120 beds are required to have in-house social work services. A second issue that's particularly relevant here is around access to clinical social work services. I put here a link to a letter that's on NHSW's website that they wrote after the HHS Inspector General issued a report on psychosocial care in skilled nursing facilities. Back in 2002, CMS said it would address the issue that clinical social workers are not able to be reimbursed for clinical services that they provide to residents of skilled nursing facilities. This is a long-standing issue that CMS said it would address. It's never addressed it. We've done a lot of work, and as many of you have, in really trying to highlight the fact that having someone without a social work degree or someone with a BSW level is not the same as having someone who meets the standard for clinical social work. And so there are access issues. And social workers as required members of the interdisciplinary team. In 2012, CMS was looking for comments to help them prepare for this draft regulation, and NASW commented in July 2012, this is up on NASW's website, about recommendations of who be in a skilled nursing facility, and then the letter, and you can see it on the website, goes on to provide a strong rationale based on research things and federal reports about why this should be enhanced. Now back to my other slides.
You can hit the tab that says Joan NH.
Yeah, okay.
There you go. Okay.
It got hidden there on my thing. realizing these are not the latest slides, Merce. If I open up another version, people will see it.
Let me reload it while if you want to.
Yeah.
I'm going to reload your presentation, and want to say anything while I do that. Sorry about that.
So what I did in the PowerPoint, and you can all see it afterwards, I provided some other examples of comments that have been made to CMS. One is when NHSW commented in 2011 around what included for accountable care organizations, where there was word that NHSW used looking at the role of the broad roles of social workers as healthcare providers and as clinicians in terms of providing mental health services. Not always the same people, broad amount of services, and wanting to be specific about that. There's also some resources provided around the provisions of, so these are the ones around the accountable care organizations, and then these are the ones from home health care. Once again, talking about social work services and requirements. These are just examples, and then you can see the links to the whole letter, so that as you're writing comments, you have an idea of how to word things. And it's really important, as I said, to be specific about what you're commenting on, to make a recommendation about what you think it should be, and to write a rationale for that. That would be what would be most helpful. I have provided here a link from the federal government about responding to Federal Register draft comments, and you can look at that just sort of as background. I also provided some links to some recent comments NASW has made to the National Quality Forum, policy issue briefs that were part of the White House Conference on Aging and their long-term services and supports policy issue brief, and also some of the work we've done at NHSW had done, and when I was running the Social Work Policy Institute, around investing in the social work workforce. And so some of these things provide background to what you want to do. There also would be useful, for instance, to use the Institute of Medicine has a recent report that was done on measuring psychosocial interventions for behavioral and mental and substance abuse disorders, has a very good definition of what psychosocial care is and what's intended. So it really strengthens goals for social workers. So let me stop there. In terms of the general how to submit regulations, comments to the proposed regulations, and what kinds of things you should do, and then where you go to submit the comments.
Joan, you had those other slides that I don't see up here anymore.
Yeah.
That had the other examples. Right.
From the IOM reports, yes, and the link to the NHSW piece.
I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah, I will put that they closed it by mistake or something. Since.
Well, thanks for those comments. And we're going to now go to Bob Connolly. Let me see. Those of you who are, there, and then Bob, you can bring people's attention to that when you'd like to, and you can move it. So go ahead, Bob.
So my name is Bob Connolly, and I've been on other calls more as an introducer, but I worked 19 and a half years at CMS, working in quality of care, dealt with the SNF PPS various federal register notices, have been on the backside of this, and I'm retired, and I'm not speaking for CMS, but I hope I can be a little bit helpful to you to think about it. As Merce said, this really it comes from the Social Security Act. There are modifications to that. And to modify it, you have to do public comment, as has been said, and they have to weigh every comment. As Joan said, every comment is read. You have to really size in another follow-up document what's heard and why you followed the recommendation or you didn't, or where things are really coming from. So I think that social work has always been as strong at the table. I think we're much stronger. We have the nursing home network, social workers, and that Merce and I are doing webinars. But this is in really your court. It's really a chance that, as I'll talk about document, that much of it is on psychosocial care, person-centered care, behavioral health, discharge planning, interdisciplinary care. These are all what you're doing, and hopefully I'm going to help you do it better, although the extent of all of the changes are, when your loads are very high, are an issue that I'm sure you're going to want to comment on. But I think overall that based on Affordable Care Act, based on non-pharmacologic approaches to dementia and Alzheimer's, based on transitions of care, this is now a regulation that not only speaks to social work, but as mentioned here, recommendations on expanding your role and having other money be put into the system in order to pay for that. So the document that's before you now is a group of us got together, summarized with CMS recommending, and as Joan said, and I think it's really important to remember this, to just say that you recommend something, it's important to either go to the CFR code or to be able to relate it to page whatever in the document. It is good because then CMS, who's getting thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of recommendations, not just from social work but from others, can kind of ground it. So as you do that, as you through it, you need to think of that, and hopefully this document will require you to do what our team did, which was go through 100 pages and all kinds of detail, but really look at this as kind of a document that is posing in their own words. The central column says reg explanation question. They're just cutting and pasting what was in the reg into this table. The left side has the code or what is really being dealt with. And the right-hand column, which is research to social work, relevance to social work research and practice, is I and others kind of seem like in social work's area, or this is important. So this is going to be posted on the web, hopefully today, and you're able to look at it. It's 26 pages, but yet it's hopefully in a way that you can just scan it, because as I had the whole document on the plane coming back from San Francisco, I was overwhelmed with how much of this is psychosocial, psychiatric, mental health, behavioral, person-centered care. So it's really a chance for us as social workers, I'm a social worker, worker. I worked in hospitals before I came to CMS for 14 years to really bring not only what I think Joan said, which is the research and best practice, but clinical knowledge. Because if you see something in here saying we're going to do it this way, and you have an example of how in your facilities or facilities in your area or state that this isn't going to work, and you can kind of document it, that's valuable as having a lot of statistics in some ways, because CMS puts these words out, and we all know words become jargon and can become lost. But it's an opportunity for you to look at what's being done. And a colleague at CMS had summed up for me. He said the most useful comments will be those for suggestions to amend specific sections of the existing requirements or offer new ones. So look at what's in here. You're going to see what the existing requirements are and what they're proposing to change. But if you think there's a better way to do it, bring it in, and therefore you're going to be able to do it. To help them, and they will, I think, appreciate that. So now I'm going to go through this document briefly so you can, I got you. Pardon me. So, an example of an area that it's from abuse and neglect, and that they have a lot of requirements in reporting, only physical and sexual abuse, but things. So be aware of that, and if you have comments, you can do that. You can add them. Hold on. All right, this is a big one. This is transitions of care, and we've webinars on this. What means is that people are transferred between facilities, like going from nursing home to another nursing home to a skilled nursing home to a home health to the hospital to a facility. That often in those transitions, the discharge is not well handled. There's not a ability to kind of crossings, get rehospitalized. It's their cost. So CMS is designating admission, transfer, discharge rights, and is bringing the idea of transitions of care. I'd like to, when you get this document, it's on page 8 of it, but it is look at how they're wording it, what they're thinking about. This isn't, not every one of your patients goes to another facility. They may go home or they may not leave, but if they do, and what they proposed is that 1 hour of social work staff time for patient at all facilities, and that they approximate that this would be used for 460,733 residents. It will cost $20,272,252. So you have to take this requirement out and then say we're adding this to the social work role, use Manpower Act to come up with the $44 an hour and that kind of thing. And then they come up with that this is going to come up to this halftime. So you look at something like this. You're a discharge planner already. You're doing this kind of work. You look at, is the proposal right? Is the hours right? What do you think? And we're going to be getting together with social work researchers to look at have there been studies done? Is there manpower reports? Some of what Joan referenced in other areas that we bring to bear that say this estimate is wrong or transitions of care need this or that. So today it's really kind of looking at the reg and saying how feasible. This on page 10 is saying how they're infusing the whole document with person-centered care. They start out with studies that it's not working. There's going to be an increased amount of documentation. They often talk about local contact agencies because this queue is requiring people to return to the community, and this opening the door to that, to comment on that. You see in here that paths are that want to make sure that the mental health of individuals is well suited. Again, this is a very detailed approach that they change regs and they deal with PATSAR second cues. So if you're a clinician working with it, it's not working for you, or what they're saying is not, you have an opportunity to comment and with it, they're not calling this out. They're saying this is the way it is, but it is something that is in the social work domain in your leadership and clinical experience. Look at this and comment will be most helpful. The let me go back here. The change in here that is welcome, but is very broad and will require a lot of your skills is behavioral health. And what they're doing is they're saying that social work and the team and facilities have to allow the highest practical mental and psychosocial well-being. And below there, you'll see that they're talking about serious mental health, how to handle that. They later on using antipsychotics. Again, this is a huge recommendation. In fact, they're asking that the facilities in behavioral health look at trauma, and the way they define trauma is people been physically in trauma, people who Holocaust survivors. So there's a whole focus on mental and psychiatric and behavioral health. Again, they're writing in that there should be more of this, and it should be done in a way. Some of you have less resources to deal with that. Some of you have suggestions on making the wording better. But again, it's an open door to really be able to kind of focus on behavioral health and what you're seeing in practice. The other thing that they mention in here is the Impact Act, and this is, again, a part of the Affordable Care Act. And what this requires, again, is this transcends across settings, and they're defining the settings as home health, SNFs, patient rehab facilities, and long-term care. And they're going to be having more standardized measures. They're adding new functional items that are going to be part and so that when you go into one of these facilities, there'd be the same definitions. And you move across settings, they're going to develop quality measures. They're going to look at resource use. They're going to look at discharge planning. So a big area that CMS has gotten money, and they're cutting that requirement that the Impact Act would be followed. So again, as you read this document, it's something to kind of look at. The other thing, as I mentioned, or I think I mentioned, is that we know that Section Q requires on any assessment that a person be asked whether they want to return to the community. And here outline how to document and what you should do, and that you refer to local contact agencies. There's another opportunity to kind of say, well, these questions aren't working, because I know some people have a dementia, and you have to keep re-asking it, and there's lots of issues. Again, this is in the reg. It's not clear to you if there's ways to make it better, if you think more survey and search should be a part of it because your facility is not referring. Again, is a very important area, and again, in the social work domain of care. And I'll end with how to figure out money. And this is what's called regulatory impact analysis. And if you go into the section, and every area has these numbers that we got it from. But first thing is the regulatory impact for social work. They would require a nurse assistant, member of nutrition services, and social worker participate in interdisciplinary care. This is now in statute. It's going to, some of you are already there, some of you lead it. Now they've required that be a part of this reg. We comment on it, and then they are recommending that it's going to take about 52 hours more a year to interdisciplinary rounds. That, to me, knowing that many of you do walking rounds and that stand-up rounds, and you got around when things get in problems, it may be a low estimate. I think the fact that they developed this is a really good thing. The thing that they're recommending, and I mentioned it before, is this transitions of care. And what it says, it would take a social worker approximately 1 hour of staff time to file review data in order to align the data with each resident's preferences and goals, and they go on to say more. So again, that is in a very way looking at that'll cost $20,272,000, and that approximately 460,000 more residents will miss, and that's their funding. The way that really affects social work is that this must provide a notice to each medical eligible resident in writing at the time of admission when we become eligible for Medicaid. But what they're saying in this part of the reg is this, don't get this or lose it, so there may be a second need to this to get a second time so they know they're eligible for Medicaid. So they're estimating 0.05 hour, 20% of residents, and they come up with a figure. Again, you deal with Medicaid every day. You know more about it than they do, so you could comment on it. The thing that they're talking about is QAPI, which is a quality assurance program, and I don't know if any of you are working with that, but this is a systematic way to look at monitoring care and making improvement. Again, they don't put social work in there, but they indicate that this will cost more money to you or in the facility. Actually, Rosalie Kane, who's a social worker, did a presentation on one of our webinars on QAPI, and she's done much of the development. And then with this statement, which again, I was reading the document and I'm getting to page 9, and I'm kind of like sleeping over. But we also consider adding more requirements to the qualifications of social worker in our 483.7 We considered requiring a master's in social work for the social worker. We also considered requiring the social worker also have a certification to clinical worker gerontology. We propose these requirements because we are concerned that increasing the qualifications for social workers in nursing homes may result in access issues. We have inputs that some nursing homes have difficulty in hiring qualified social workers. We welcome your comments related to qualifications for social workers, especially whether a state licensure remain the threshold for requirements or if additional requirements are appropriate. There it is. They're asking us what to do, and they're saying that available social workers many facilities have problems recruiting. I think that BSW and MSW, given their now using a competency-based training, be the standard, but one comment that MSW should be the standard, or talk about other ways they can get at this. But again, it's a golden opportunity. So I will end there and turn it over to Merce.
Thank you. That was very helpful and gives people a sense of the level of detail that is part of the regulations that they're asking for comments on. And so one document that we also came up with is just, instead of go through the 100 pages, which you're welcome to do, or the 29 pages that our committee has summarized in terms of affecting social work, we came up with 10, just to give you an idea of what is covered in these proposed changes. And there's a lot on admissions, transfers, and discharge rights, the rights of the residents, and also a lot of language related to those three processes, which have traditionally included social workers. The mention of social workers as a mandatory member of the interdisciplinary team, they're looking for comments about that. Care planning is big, and then lots of staff training requirements for direct care staff and for others. And any of the training issues are issues that social workers are prepared on when they're going through their BSW program and or their MSW program, and they would be prepared to provide this training in-house or be a source. Especially look at those last three ones: ethics, cultural competence, trauma-informed care. Also workers get that as part of their training. The dementia training is not necessarily part of all social work education, but it's increasingly becoming so, and it would also be something that we as a field of social work could be making sure that our social workers are graduating with that basic information. They don't have a section of the proposed rule changes labeled working with families or legal representatives of residents, but it's sprinkled all over these proposed rule changes. And so if somebody was really interested in talking about the way that social workers work with families and legal representatives, there's lots of different places in the proposed rule changes that would speak to that. I mentioned the brand new section on behavioral health services, and they talk a lot about mental health services there too. A big focus on comprehensive person-centered care planning with a focus on quality of life. There's new proposed language related to the PASAR coordination, QAPI, as Bob just talked about, and the 120-bed rule. So these are major proposed changes. We haven't seen anything this big in 25 years. So please take the time to think about how you can win using your practice experience and your knowledge of the literature or other data to help CMS staff members better understand how quality of life for nursing home residents be enhanced through social work services. I'd like to open it up if there's any questions or comments. Please put it in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I'll read your question out, and then we'll try to address it as best as we can. If there's any questions or comments, and while people are thinking of their questions, Joan, did anything else come to mind as Bob was speaking?
Yes, I really want to reinforce the comments that Bob made. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me is that in 25 years, we've seen this sort of move around the intent of nursing homes to be places where people can better quality of life, and many of the proposals in the new regs really speak to that, and those are definitely places where social workers play critical roles, and we really need to speak to that and give input, and sort of it's an opportunity for us to strengthen the voice of social work and the importance of social work interventions with CMS, because it's not the group of people that CMS regularly to. They're sort of much more medically oriented, although we know, like Bob, who was there for many years, and many other social workers who are at CMS, everyone has sort of a different hat on when they're there. So providing strong comments and addressing these issues around workforce implications in a way that also aligns with the importance of the social work role is important, because if we just say, well, this would just create a caseload that's too big, we really won't get very far. But if we talk about sort of what the processes are to achieve the goals that CMS has set out, and how social workers working with us in nursing homes can address them, and what those workforce needs are, then I think we can be much more effective.
Thank you. We did get a question in about where can people get a printed copy of today's webinar. All the PowerPoints will be posted on the nursing home website. If you just Google University of Iowa School of Social Work Nursing Home, you'll go to our website. Right now, the federal rules are there, and that's how you also registered. You went through that website. And after today, we will post the rest of the information. I wanted to clarify a couple things also. I want to thank Joan and Bob for being our presenters today, and also to reinforce that they're speaking their own opinions. They're not representing any organization as they agreed to be part of our webinar today. And that also reminds me to tell you, the participants, when you submit a comment, those comments are public. So your name, your personal name, will be associated with whatever comments you submit, and those comments will be available to the public. So just be careful about if you give examples about your workplace or about your boss or something like that. Know that your name is going to be associated with those comments, and that all the comments are public. And I checked on Saturday, there's already 150 comments posted on the website of people to these proposed rule changes. And the closer we get to the deadline, September 14th, the more comments that will be there. A couple other questions. So why access? Oh, thank you for all this work. Oh, great. It's about how the wage of $44 was chosen. Oh, no. Bob, do you have any insight on how CMS came up with $44 an hour for a social worker?
I'm looking in the reg right now. Why don't you take another question, and maybe I'll be able to find it. Okay.
And they might not, I know how they came up with that, and that was a CMS.
Well, systematically, they look at a manpower for the United States of all labor categories, and then they attribute it to what's happening in nursing homes, and they use a kind of a systematic approach, but it's described in here somewhere, but
let's say something about that. It was one of the red flags that it raised for me, because it's this sort of slippery issue about who's a social worker and what skills are they performing. Right. Looking at clinical social workers to provide mental health services for nursing home residents, we're looking at a different skill level, and we're looking at a different pay scale than what they may have picked up from the Department of Labor if you averaged, social service assistants, the 15,000 nursing homes in the U.S. So I think those are the kinds of issues that we really need to address. Different skill levels, different competencies, and those are 2 points I want to stress. One has to do with, they say, well, we're not really kind of focused on qualifications, we're focused on competencies. So the more that we can address what those sets of knowledge and skills are to perform the tasks that are required, so it's not just workload, but competencies, is important. And then something else, and I highlighted it in the table he put together, and I think I mentioned it earlier. They do ask a question about needing to look at sort of workload issues related to nursing. I would suggest we raise that in terms of social work as well.
Right.
All right. I also think as we make our comments, it's important to ground each and every comment in the quality of life of the nursing home resident. That's what centers these comments. We should be looking at ways that we can apply our skills and perspective and practice toward increasing the quality of life for nursing home residents. So think about your own social work, education, and practice experience, and what could you be bringing to nursing home if you weren't doing other things like tracking down lost clothing or labeling dentures, or things that are very important but don't need to be done by a licensed clinical professional. I think it would also be easier to keep social workers in these jobs if they were allowed and, in fact, encouraged to do social work with families, work with residents on psychosocial issues, and because so many important issues related to grief and loss and thriving and taking a perspective, that we could really be making a big difference in this setting if the social workers were able to do social work. Let's see if there are questions before we conclude.
Rich, do you want to mention that we're going to try and get with researchers, people who have statistics, look at reports, and put a little more flesh on these big ideas?
As everybody, there's not a whole lot of time to comment on such a huge amount of proposed changes. So we've got a small committee where we're going to go through the literature that speaks to contributions from social workers and social work competencies, and we're going to try to organize that literature around the larger table that Bob talked about, and also these 10 issues. And then make that available through our listserv, the National Nursing Home Social Work Network listserv. So if you're not on that listserv, please get on it, and then you'll see how we pour the literature that is available and some suggested language, and then you could bring practice experience and your own perspective to but all the time and hours, it's going to take 20 hours or so for us to go through the literature and categorize it all. There's no sense in everybody doing that. We'll do that over the next 10 days, and then we'll post it on the listserv. And if you can use any of that information to back up your own opinions, then that'll be done for you. But don't wait for that to start thinking about, of all these regulations, proposed regulations, which ones are you most interested in, and which ones do you really have something to say? And CMS is interested in having somebody point out unintended consequences. A really big deal for them, because they're not practicing in a nursing home setting, and they know that. And although they've spoken with a lot of people and they've done a lot of work to prepare themselves, you as a practicing social worker will be able to spot unintended consequences that they may not have. And don't just think of unintended negative consequences. You might also be putting some of these connections together and recognizing ways that weren't even anticipated that could be benefiting nursing home residents and their families.
Let me just add something there also in terms of if you in your state that there's been some study in your state about nursing home deficiencies or addressing psychosocial needs or mental health care for people in long-term care or older adults in your community. If you have any studies like that that might not be in journal articles or in the peer-reviewed literature, if you could share those with MERS, that would be really important because those things are very hard to find. Through our own advocacy over the years, we were able to get an Inspector General report on psychosocial care, and there was also a report in about 2007, I think, that HHS did around the need for social workers in long-term care, and there's the data from NHSW's workforce study. But any workforce studies related to nursing home long-term care, serving older adults, mental health needs of nursing home residents and such, or community resources that are working together with nursing homes would be incredibly important.
Yeah, I just add to that, think of networking skills. I happen to know the licensure board president in Maryland. I've sent him because it asks whether license is important, and I also on the NHSW Aging Committee in Maryland. So use your network to get that out because it's not a lot of time, but quality people, if there's somebody doing research on aging in your state, someone who's, like I sent out to the mental health association in Maryland because they're very concerned about the mentally ill and homeless. Just use your networking too.
Good. If people wanted to pledge to a letter themselves, submit at least one comment and try to get two other people to submit a comment, that would really make a huge difference in terms of helping educate senior staff on the role of social workers in improving quality of life for nursing home residents. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I'm going to conclude for today. I'll be posting this information on the website, and want to thank everybody for your attendance. And please send us any your comments you'd like us to consider or share, and make sure you get your voice heard at CMS by the deadline. Thanks, everybody.
What's the name of the table I was talking from? So
let me see if I can put up here.
It's like social work SW dash
excerpted summary of key items related to how social workers contribute to improving quality of life of nursing home residents. For short, we'll call it the 26-pager, but it's there, and that's really probably the most helpful document in terms of going through and figuring out where you as an individual have something to say or something to weigh in. And as I mentioned, please don't wait until we get the literature summarized, because you won't have enough time to then do as Joan suggested, and that's have a couple people read over your comments before you submit them, because they need to make sense, and to have impact they need to be specific. You need to cite what exactly you're talking about, and then see if there's any literature that you can back up with. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.